please take it away. We are enthusiastic to have you. Dean Singer, Dean of the College, one of the founding fathers of Connections.
Thank you very much, Ben. I really appreciate it. It's fun to be here tonight. And so I'm going to talk with you a little bit about the Connections program at Connecticut College, which is really probably one of the most innovative programs that you're going to find at any liberal arts college. And the way that I can tell you about Connections is first to say that if you're interested in a liberal arts college, you already know that there are certain key ingredients that every liberal arts college is going to have. It's a residential community. It has a close faculty-student relationships. And one of the other things is it's going to expect that you draw on the diverse curriculum. You're going to take courses from across different areas of the curriculum. And that's true at Connecticut College. And then something else that you're always going to expect at a liberal arts college or at any university or college is that you want to have a strong major, or sometimes you may have two majors or a major and a minor. That's true at Connecticut College. We have very powerful majors that you can choose, whether it's in economics or anthropology or biology or English. You have a strong major that will usually consist of approximately 10 courses over the 4 years that you're at Connecticut College. So we're like all other liberal arts colleges in those key ingredients, and those are things that you want to have to really benefit your education and help you prepare for the world after college and for the kinds of careers you want. But what makes the education at Connecticut College distinctive is the Connections curriculum. And why is it different from other colleges? Because usually what you can find at most liberal arts colleges is going to be one of the two following things. You either are going to have an expectation to take courses across the curriculum that are usually called general education requirements or distribution requirements, or you're going to come to a liberal arts education where you'll have what's called an open curriculum, where you just get to choose courses and you don't have any required courses. Connections actually takes the best of both of those worlds. It allows you to choose courses from across the curriculum that really interest you, and it makes sure that you sample widely from the curriculum so that you do get the best of all different disciplines that are offered at a college. So how does it do this? How does it mix those two possibilities? The way it does is by helping you right from the beginning with a first-year seminar, begin to get acquainted with all the resources that are offered at the college. Every student is in a first-year seminar. They get to choose that first-year seminar among their top 3 choices, and they have a supportive staff that works with them, a faculty member, advisors that are student advisors, and a staff advisor. Based on that first-year seminar, then they get an opportunity in their sophomore year to enter into a pathway or a center. And this is the real special part of Connections. And Professor Queen is going to tell you about pathways and centers in a lot more depth. But what's the important thing about centers and pathways is that when you're entering in your sophomore year, you can begin to define something that really interests you. After having taken courses in your first year and sampled the curriculum a bit, you can begin to define something that interests you and begin to identify courses across the curriculum that you can connect around that interest. And you do that by joining a pathway or applying to an interdisciplinary center. And centers and pathways give you a chance to work with other students from all across the curriculum. So you could be in a course in your sophomore year with a student that's in mathematics, and you could be someone that is interested in the arts. But what brings you together is that you both have an interest in a theme that is organized within that pathway or center. And so we have centers that focus on the environment, that focus on public policy, that focus on arts and technology. We have pathways that focus on creativity or on entrepreneurship or on communication or on peace and conflict. And whatever passion that you begin to develop, you can join that center or pathway in your sophomore year. Once you're in the pathway or center, you're taking a course that Professor Queen will describe in more depth, where you begin to learn about your interest and develop ways of taking courses that focus on that interest. And then what you do in your junior year is you have an opportunity. We specialize in what we call the liberal arts in action. So you have an opportunity in your junior year to begin to think about a way that you can take what you're learning outside the campus through an internship or a study away experience, or even doing something in the New London community. So if you're interested in a particular area of, let's say, peace and conflict, you could choose to do a study away program that would help you learn more about different ways of approaching conflict reduction or the development of peaceful approaches to conflict. When you come back as a senior, you have an opportunity to take a course with your fellow Pathway or Center members in your senior year called the Senior Reflection Seminar, where you come back together and talk about what you've learned about your particular interest. And as seniors together in that seminar, you then have an opportunity in November of your fall senior year to present when there's a day where we have no classes. We call it the All College Symposium, and you get to present about what you've learned about the interest that you developed. And what's great about this approach to our connections approach is that you're doing this in conjunction with your major field of study. So you still have that major that all liberal arts colleges have, but you've been able to tie courses together around something that enhances your major and allows you to learn in another area that you're very excited about. And what's great tonight is that you're going to hear both from a professor and 3 panelists that are students that are in pathways and centers that can tell you exactly what their passionate interest was and how they've used the Connections curriculum to develop those passions, to develop research interests, to develop career interests, and to put the liberal arts into action in their particular way. And they've done this without having to check off a box of requirements that they don't really want to take. They've done this with the support of faculty and staff. And I noticed, and I'll finish up by saying this, I noticed that when you took the poll, the thing that you endorsed the most was that you hoped that you would have support along your 4 years to guide your path in what you wanted to work on or study. And that's what is special about Connections. You find an interest that you have, but you have faculty and staff and fellow students that are working with you along the 4 years to support and really help guide you toward that, developing that interest fully. So I'll stop there. And what's so great is we've got 3 students and a professor to tell you how this all works. And I think you're going to see how exciting it really is. So I'll turn things over to Professor Queen now from the History Department.
Okay, here we go. So I'm going to share my screen with everyone. Okay. I am the coordinator of the Global Capitalism Integrative Pathway, and I'm going to spend a few minutes in the weeds, if you will, to give you a close-up sense of what it would be like if you were a student who elected to follow this particular pathway. So as Dean Singer said, the launch pad for the pathway is really the sophomore seminar. We call it the Integrative Seminar. And that is the place where you get everything ready for what I like to call your journey. In the case of the Global Capitalism Seminar, we have a tripartite arrangement to the syllabus. And the very first thing that we do is to introduce students to capitalism, just as a field of study and practice, so that students can develop a vocabulary of capitalism. And they do this in a kind of interdisciplinary fashion. And having developed that vocabulary, in the second part of the seminar, we explore specific case studies of social movements generated by capitalism. One year we might be focusing on Black Lives Matter. Another semester it might be the conscious capitalism movement. But we often do several that can speak to one another from differing perspectives on capitalism. The third part of the course, we do what I like to call the connections work. And these, the connections work are specific activities that prepare students for their journey along the pathway. And I'll come back to this point in a minute. But first, I just want to speak a little bit about the learning objectives of the seminar. Students who take this seminar will benefit in multiple ways from the curriculum. The seminar will teach multiple perspectives. This would be interdisciplinary perspectives on the core characteristics of global capitalism, whether we're thinking politically, socially, environmentally, or culturally, and in that way can address many, many different interests that students come into the pathway and want to explore. The pathway also fosters critical analytical engagement with different perspectives on capitalism. It increases students' understanding of how capitalism affects people in diverse ways. It develops personal self-awareness of one's relationship with global capitalism, and it enables students to evaluate alternatives and resistance to global capitalism. So all of those things are part of the seminar. By the end of the seminar, students will have created this really neat electronic platform called an e-portfolio. And this e-portfolio is a really special part of the pathway because it is the electronic space where you will integrate, reflect, and track your pathway journey through your senior year. And we can talk about this more in the Q&A if students are interested. You also will, as Dean Singer suggested, you will have designed and animating questions, something you're incredibly passionate about. And the pathway enables you to take that, what we call an animating question, precisely because it's going to animate your journey and excite you and carry you through the next 3 years. That animating question is the foundation for the rest of your work in the pathway. In the seminar, you will map what we call itinerary courses, not courses that you're told to take to fulfill a gen ed requirement, but courses that you choose on your own that you want to take to explore your question. And typically, these courses cross multiple disciplines, right? So you don't have to just think about a question from a historical perspective. You don't have to just think about it from a political perspective. You can think about your question from multiple disciplinary perches, and that students have found to be an incredibly enriching approach. In addition, during the seminar, you will draft what we call a global local engagement plan. You'll get to think about, do I want to go study abroad in Copenhagen to learn about my animating question? Do I want to take a particular internship down the street in London to address my animating question? So you have lots of different opportunities to think about and plan how best to integrate these different pieces of your college career. You will also get the opportunity to simply reflect, to just sit with your fellow students, sit with your professor, and ask those big questions and reflect on the whys and the hows. And you can, in that context, connect the hows and the whys to your major or your double major, or maybe a major and a minor. We also, in this seminar, talk about postgraduate aspirations. We encourage you to dream big and think about how to connect the dots between what you're going to be doing at the college level to what you want to do when you launch from Connecticut College. And how can we do that well? How can we prepare you in the best possible way to launch and be successful and be able to follow your passions and be prepared to be global citizens of the 21st century. And finally, in the seminar, you write this wonderfully thoughtful reflection paper at the end where you kind of put together your plan. It also includes an annotated bibliography, which is a kind of resource for further academic work on your animating question that you can refer to and explore further in the years to come. At the end of the seminar, sadly, you all scatter, typically to different corners of the globe, perhaps a little bit more difficult with COVID. And then, as Dean Singer said, you come back senior year and I get to hear all the wonderful things that you've done between the sophomore year and the senior year. And I just want to close, because I don't want to run out of time, with just one example of what Dean Singer was talking about that makes the pathways so unique, which is to say, it enables you, instead of having all of these disparate experiences, I've got a major, I've got a minor, oh, I went to study abroad over here and I did this internship. It enables you to integrate all these things in an incredibly meaningful way. And just this morning, I was talking to my seniors, and so many of them said they love the pathway because it enabled them to bring together seemingly disparate interests in really interesting ways. And I just want to talk about this one student, Juliette Levesque. She was in our first cohort of students. To give you an example of what Dean Singer meant by that. So Juliette was a history major, and she also was pursuing a museum studies certificate. And during her coursework as a history major, she became really, really interested in colonialism and imperialism. And in classes with me, she was introduced to the notion of the colonial gaze and the civilizing projects of colonial regimes. So she took that interest and she linked that with her interest in representation as a museum studies student, and came up with this wonderful question: is it possible to escape the colonial gaze in museums honoring the history of indigenous peoples? So she had this amazing question, and she was so passionate about it. And so what did she decide to do? She decided to go to New Zealand for her study away and to study the Maori people. Now, we do not have a single course at Connecticut College about the Maori people, but off she went with my encouragement, and she took courses about the Maori indigenous peoples in New Zealand, and she did an internship, and that is the photograph on the side of this slide. She did an internship at the New Zealand Portrait Gallery, where there was an exhibition they were putting together, a photographic exhibition on the Maori people, right? So she took that internship, that experience. She took her coursework abroad. She integrated that with her history coursework at Connecticut College and in her coursework as a museum studies student. And she was able to just integrate that all with this wonderful animating question, which she then sought to answer publicly at the All College Symposium her senior year. So that's just one example, but I think it just kind of translates a little bit of what Dean Singer was saying into just the excitement of here's one student's path. And I will tell you that the students in my pathway come from everywhere. I have Gov majors, I have history majors, I have English majors, I have environmental studies majors, right? And that's a wonderful thing. Students come in and they form this cohort, really working closely together to pursue something they're really, really excited about. And they're able to take what was a really disparate, disconnected liberal arts experience, or that tedious gen ed checklist, and have this really, really exciting, integrated, reflective experience. Thank you. Hope I'm not too over my time.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah. I'll just introduce myself quickly. I am a senior psychology major, human development minor, and in the public health pathway. A little bit about what I do on campus. I work at the admissions office as a senior admission fellow. I'm also an intern for our alumni office of engagement, and I'm also a co-pitch of one of our a cappella groups on campus called the Con Artists. So that's a little bit about me. I'm really excited to be here tonight to chat with you all and hopefully answer some of your questions. So a little bit about my story through the Connections curriculum. I was one of those students that came to Con initially and had absolutely no idea what I wanted to study. I had so many different interests, and I just wanted to study it all. So my first year, I was taking classes in sociology, anthropology, music, biochem. I was all over the place. And I eventually settled into my psychology major because I really loved the intro psych course I took. And in particular, each week we broke up into smaller lab sections of about 10 to 15 students. So you really got that one-on-one time with your lab professor. And I was able to forge a really great relationship with this professor, and she ended up becoming my academic advisor. And so whenever I see her around campus, she'll always say hi and, ask how I'm doing, how my class is going. So she really helped me and advised me to eventually declare my psychology major. So I went into my sophomore year really loving my psych classes, and it really sparked my interest in mental health and what I was studying. But then I eventually decided to join the public health pathway because I knew I had this interest in mental health, and I felt that the public health pathway would be a really great foundation and help structure my interest in just digging deeper. So I was able to take some classes in human development and sociology, and that really exposed me to different areas of systemic racism, health disparities, and how that all sort of works together. So I remember I took a class my junior year called multicultural psychology, and that really was just one of my favorite classes that I've taken throughout my time at Con. I was able to really look at systemic racism and examine my own racial identity, which is something I'd never done before. So I was really, the opportunity to do that was something really special and definitely impacted me and my interest in mental health and looking at these health disparities, and why access to care may differ across races and the stigma that's accompanied with that. So this past summer, I was able to actually do a remote internship with Crisis Text Line, where I was trained as a crisis counselor and was able to talk to people in crisis about their mental health challenges. So that was something that was really important for me in connecting my learning and what I had been learning in my classes, these past 4 years, and, putting it in action and helping these people. So yeah, I really feel like the Connections curriculum has helped me sort of dig deeper and find, as the curriculum suggests, these connections across different areas of study, and really just fostered my interest in mental health disparities. So that's something that I am interested in, going into post-grad. We'll see what grad school looks like in the next few years, but that's just a little bit about me. And I think I'm passing off it to Stephanie.
Thank you, Hannah. My name is Stephanie Martinez. I'm also a senior here at Connecticut College, part of the Holleran Center for Community Action and Public Policy. A little bit about myself. I also work with the admissions office as a senior admissions fellow, and I'm part of Lavos Common Interest Housing for Latinx students on campus. So my journey with a center specifically on campus, I came into Con with a really rigid self-imposed structure. I'm gonna study government, and I'm probably gonna go to law school afterwards, and that's all I'm gonna do. But as I took my first year seminar, the 50 years of the Cuban Revolution, I realized that I was sort of neglecting this passion for history that I knew I had in high school, but I didn't think I would pursue in college. And so once after my first year seminar, I got the opportunity to visit Cuba with the professor and 7 other students. And so that only continued to sort of serve as a note that maybe history is something that I also should pursue. And so now I'm a history minor, and I was thinking about how can I collaborate this together? What's my area of interest? And so when I applied to the Holleran Center, I had a very broad area of interest. It was Latinx representation in the United States government. What does that mean? Does that mean representation in Congress? Does that mean voting, looking at voting and the participation of Latinx eligible voters in the United States? And so that's currently my question that I'm working on for my honors thesis. And as I reflect now, I'm also looking at American political development as an area of study. And so the center has really allowed me to connect those two interests that at first I didn't think I would. And it also allowed me for community integration. So I'm personally more introverted, and so the Holleran Center facilitated that community engagement. I was able to work with a local campaign and their Latinx outreach, and I was also able to work with the League of Women Voters. And so I'm really thankful for the center and the work that it has allowed me to do. And all the people that I have met that typically I wouldn't have met if I had just stayed within my rigid structure and the government discipline.
Thanks, guys. Hi, everyone. My name is Brendan Stiltner. I'm a junior from Hamden, Connecticut. I'm a psychology major with a minor in philosophy, currently in the Power and Knowledge pathway. On campus, I'm the president of the Men's Ultimate Frisbee Club team. And I also am a TA for the introductory logic class in the philosophy department. And I was a student advisor for the class of 2023. I was somewhere in between Stephanie and Hannah coming into Con. I didn't have a really rigid sense of what I wanted to do, but I also had some ideas. I thought I was going to do maybe math or comp sci, but after multivariable calculus, my first semester, I sort of decided to hold off on any more math and explore some other things. I tried out a psych class and thought that maybe that's what I wanted to do. I had some family friends who were therapists and psychiatrists, and they were encouraging me to pursue that. I was trying to get a few more psych classes my second semester, but wasn't able to, and was left with a anthropology class. I wasn't too thrilled about it at first, but in hindsight, that was one of the most important classes I've ever taken at Con, and it might be my most. That really shifted my view to think about things globally and how power and history sort of affects us. We read this great ethnography called Righteous Dope Fiend about heroin addicts in San Francisco in the 1990s and early 2000s. And that really fueled my interest for trying to understand how these people were put in these places. In my sophomore year, when it came to figuring out a pathway, the Power and Knowledge pathway really pulled my interest in that. We read a little bit about Michel Foucault in the anthropology class, and the Power and Knowledge pathway really focuses on his work and his influence, while also sort of applying his ideas to current issues. I was in the sophomore seminar for the Power and Knowledge pathway in the spring, and it really lined up perfectly. Sort of my ideas from that anthropology class, mixing with my views in psychology in the seminar, has put me in a position now where I am just so thrilled and excited for more classes and more experiences. I'd like to just touch on quickly something that was brought up a few times, but I want to highlight, and that's like the advising component of Connections. There was a few times when I was really lost and unsure what my future would hold when it came to my freshman spring, when I didn't get any psych classes. I was pretty sure I wanted to be a psych major by then, but was really worried if I would be sort of lost or fall behind without getting any of my sophomore spring. A variety of professors, faculty, and friends encouraged me that I'd be fine and to sort of make it the most out of what I was in. And I'm so glad I did. That was really key advice. And while I didn't really need to hear it again, as I quickly fell in love with the anthropology class, I've gone to a wide number of different friends, faculty, and family members, as well as professors over my time at Con. And I think that's one of the most important parts of the Connections pathway, judging from the poll responses you gave, that the advising is so good that you'll be not just safe, but find what is best for you no matter what.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, everybody. Dean Singer and Professor Queen have played extraordinarily lofty roles in the creation and development of Connections, and also helping it adapt in a very rapidly changing world. And I believe our three students, we are in awe of how they've made the most of the resources at Connecticut College and how they've really forged very integrative paths within this highly integrative liberal arts curriculum at Con. But now you have the chance to interact with them, and I am going to pull up the Q&A. I see we have a handful of questions here, so I will feed some of your questions to our panelists. So first, and I think this question could be covered in broad strokes by our faculty members, and perhaps our students could weigh in on their personal experiences. How is a major selected, and how is a pathway or center selected, and how do they work together?
I'd love to answer that question because it's also a little confusing that we have both these centers and pathways. So I think it's always good to help people who are learning about connections find out what the difference is. So first, a major is declared in your, usually by your spring of your sophomore year. You can declare it at any time, but most students do it by the second semester of their sophomore year. And students do that by talking to a wide range of faculty members, staff, fellow students, and eventually settling on a major where they feel comfortable with the faculty member. They feel that the discipline is something that they might be able to leverage toward maybe graduate school or a career afterwards. So it's a very important choice, but you're not rushed to do it. You really do have 3 semesters before you make that choice. Now, centers and pathways are chosen in the fall of your sophomore year. And the difference is that centers are competitive to enter. Not everyone who applies to a center is accepted. There are only 4 centers, and they limit the number of students that can be in the centers because there's a lot of resources that go into the center experience. So students apply for a center, and the majority of students are accepted, but not all students are accepted to the centers. Once you're in a center, a difference from a center to a pathway is that there's a little bit more structure in a center, and there's an expectation when you get to your senior year that you'll do either an individual study, which is a 1 semester long project, or you'll do an honors thesis, which is a 2 semester project. With pathways, you don't apply, you simply declare you'd like to join a pathway, and then you can enter the pathway. And there are 12 different available pathways right now that you could enter into. And as we mentioned before, they range widely in topics from communication, peace and conflict, power and knowledge, global capitalism, etc. But when you join either a center or pathway in the spring of your sophomore year, you take the gateway course for the center or the thematic inquiry course for the pathway. So that's when you start the pathway and center in the spring of your sophomore year, and you do that with fellow students in either the center or the pathway. So I hope that explains a little bit of the differences between pathways, centers, and majors.
We have a question that I think would be most applicable to the students on our panel. How easy is it to manage academic, work life, and student personal life when you're pursuing a major or a pathway or center at Connecticut College?
You go, Hannah.
I feel like it varies from person to person. I personally feel like it's fairly easy to manage, balancing work life and a social life, and that's something that I felt was supported by the college. Also, a lot of the faculty administration realized that while we are a very academically motivated school, it's really important to have a sense of a social life for your well-being. So for me, I'm in class for a few hours a day. When it's non-COVID times, typically I'd be in a cappella rehearsals until 10, 11, sometimes 12 at night. So it's really just making sure that you are have good time management skills. And our academic resource center on campus in our library is also a really great way to build on your time management and organizational skills.
I'd also highlight that adjusting to college, and specifically the aspect of balancing and time management, is not something you pick up right away, but especially in your first semester, there's a lot of care is given to that, both in structural things, but also just sort of an implicit understanding that things take time, and that there are a lot of resources to help you make that adjustment, so that while it's not something that comes right away, you pretty quickly pick it up and it really becomes second nature. And like Hannah says, it's really not that much of, or not that bad. It's pretty easy.
I would also add that the pathways and the centers are kind of there to help you facilitate those different interests that you may have. So if you do have two majors, if you do have two minors, the pathway or the center are helping you to sort of connect those, and it's not sort of adding a workload, it's sort of facilitating the connections between those two. And that's why I think it's also been easy for me to balance those two things. And I think another thing is the relationship that you build with the people in your pathway, in your center. They're very understanding, and they understand that as a student at Con, you're connected to many different things, and it can be sometimes very demanding. And so it's not like rigid in that sense. They're very understanding. And what Brendan said, there's very multiple resources for you to help manage that.
Stephanie, you bring up a very important point of the pathways and centers that it provides a little bit of guidance for you and a timeline of sorts to help you make this experience as integrative as you can. So that leads me to my next question, which I'm going to split in two. And Dean Singer, perhaps you could take the first part of this and students can take the second part. So the first part is, how easy is it to add a pathway or center late, or to switch between pathways or centers because of the timeline? And our second part, which I hope our students will address, have you ever considered switching a pathway or a center? And if not, why did you decide to stick with your pathways and centers?
All right, so I'll take the first part, which is that generally students choose in the sophomore year, but there are occasions where students make a decision in their junior year that, oh, you know, I really do want to join a pathway. And they are, in most circumstances, that can be worked out and figured out for them. So there is a second chance in a way. As far as students switching out of pathways or centers, what's great about centers and pathways is the question that you may start with is not necessarily the question that you end with. There's so much flexibility within the centers and pathways that the umbrella is very large. So usually students don't feel that they need to switch out, but they may change their question or their focus. And there's so much room to do that because these aren't rigid structures. So now I'll let the students answer the other part.
I like to hop on that. And to that point, in my sophomore seminar, there was a student there who was a junior. And in hindsight, I realized that, and sort of getting to know the professor, that that is something that can only happen at Con, where the professors have such a passion and care for your interests and are willing to facilitate that. I don't know if at other schools, or at least I can say that definitely at Con, professors are just so excited that you have interest in my case, the Power of Knowledge pathway, that they're happy to facilitate that. And Dean Singer's office is really excellent at facilitating that as well. I've never considered switching out of my pathway, but I would say that the settling in on a pathway and selecting one could be a pretty challenging process. It was for me. I was really down to the wire choosing between Power of Knowledge and public health. But I believe a professor pointed out to me that, you know, you're interested in these two things. They might seem distinct or very different, but why can't you just bring in public health and Power of Knowledge and sort of use a lens of Power of Knowledge to analyze public health? And at that, I was like, well, that sort of solves it. And I think that's something that, just going back to my previous point, that the support and advising around the pathways is really, or pathways and centers, and the whole curriculum is really excellent, and that facilitates it and makes the whole experience that much better.
Yeah, I can sort of add to Brennan's point. I also, similarly spent a considerable amount of time figuring out what pathway was going to be best for me and my interests. And because I had taken a few psychology classes at that point and knew I sort of wanted to go into the field of mental health, that the public health pathway would be the best for me. But even through that, I mean, I've met so many students in my pathway who come from different majors like English and government. So it's really, I think what makes the pathways so enriching and diverse is because you have students that have a wide array of interests, and to share that experience with other students in the pathway is what makes it very fulfilling, especially for me.
Our next question focuses a little bit on career preparation. So for students, how has the Connections program helped you prepare for a career? And for Professor Queen and Dean Singer, how do you think the Connections program has helped your advisees prepare for a career or distinguish themselves in whatever endeavors they're trying to pursue post-grad? So we'll start with our students. How has Connections helped you prepare for a career?
I can speak a little bit on that. So as I mentioned in the intro, part of the work that I've done in the Holleran Center was getting to work within the New London community with a variety of different organizations that focus on different things. So I worked with the Homeless Hospitality Center my sophomore year, right as I started my work with the Holleran Center. And then my junior year, like I said, I worked with the League of Women Voters, and I worked with a political campaign in New London as well. And I think it allowed me to sort of dip my toes into some interests, into some different areas, nonprofit work, political campaigns, and really solidified my interest in law and wanting to go to law school moving forward, and particularly immigration law. And I think that's where I see myself being able to produce the most change that I want to see, and also the power that holds in public policy, with the Holleran Center also focusing on in public policy.
Yeah, just to add to that, I feel like my initial interest in mental health was sort of motivated by my interest in the more clinical aspect of psychology. I was really interested in learning about specific mental health disorders. But, you know, through the classes I've taken in the public health pathway and Connections in general has really broadened my understanding of, you know, larger sociocultural contexts. And, you know, I've learned how important that is, and especially I'm thinking of going into like therapy and counseling to understand those larger issues so that you can have a more deeper understanding of the individual in the larger context that they're in. So I feel like those are skills that are very invaluable and that I will absolutely, you know, bring into my future work.
As a or junior currently, I feel a little bit less qualified to speak on this, so I'll defer to Dean Singer and Professor Queen first before saying anything.
It's so funny that you asked that this question came up, because just this morning when I was sitting with my seniors in our virtual classroom, and they were talking about the pathways. One student shared the following. He is an econ major and a finance minor. And he said, you know, the thing that was so awesome about the global capitalism pathway is that, you know, he said, Professor Queen, economics, it's like really focused, and there's lots of theory, and you know, it's just really focused. And I took this pathway, and all of a sudden I had the context. I had this much larger historical context to understand, right, how economics functions in a capitalist system, and what are some of those historical, political, social, environmental, you know, consequences. And he said, you know, it's really changed me. You know, when I go out and look for that job, I'm going to be thinking about those bigger, you know, those bigger issues, not just like how I can plug in. It's not going to be so easy for me to just kind of plug into a finance job. I'm now kind of thinking about those larger implications of what I'm going to do as a person working in the field of capitalism. So I think that's just a wonderful way to answer the student's question, right? And Hannah, you're saying a lot of that too, that, you know, you can have a very focused career goal, but having the opportunity to kind of take that career goal and think about it in these different ways, whether it's, you know, you have an internship, as Stephanie said, you know, kind of to get your feet wet with this particular organization or that organization, or you have this larger academic understanding that contextualizes what you're doing. But that is really the essence of the pathway, right? Is all of these different elements can come together, not to mention just, the basic skills of learning to write well, learning to speak well, all of the kinds of things you have to do as you go through the pathway, right? Those skills that are also really translatable to your life as a professional. So I think that, personally, that's one of the things that I find really gratifying as a faculty member, the ways in which I feel that the pathways really help students connect the dots between, what they're doing at the liberal arts, in a liberal arts school, and what they want to do professionally. And it really does prepare them well, because they have these different experiences, but a place to reflect on their interrelationship and to integrate, right, what they take away from these different kinds of experiences, to make them much more nuanced and thoughtful, right, about that next step, that next career step.
I'll just throw in two very concrete examples. In the entrepreneurship pathway, what the students do in the sophomore gateway course that they take is they actually work on and usually they work in groups on developing what would be a startup project. And they begin to explore how they might get funding for that project, how they could actually make it into a viable company or enterprise. So the students have what's called the entrepreneurship lab, where they're working in small groups to develop their entrepreneurial projects. So that is really actually starting to show some results in students who are taking that to the next step and beginning to start their own enterprises. The other example, and I'm going to come back to Professor Queen again, I met with a student today who is in the global capitalism pathway. She is in the midst of applying for a Fulbright scholarship. And the Fulbright will allow her to teach English for a year after college, and she hopes to do this in Brazil. And she started really with an interest in Portuguese, but over time she's become more and more interested through the global capitalism pathway in looking at racial disparities and economic disparities. And so for her, using her Portuguese language skills, now it's of real interest for her. She wants to become a teacher after college, but she wants to be able to have that year in Brazil to really learn more about a multicultural society, a multiracial society. And I see that growing right out of her work in the pathway, and it's going to influence the kind of teacher that she becomes later on in her career. So I hope those are some good, just straightforward examples that you can see the way pathways and centers really move you in a direction for career thinking and career preparation.
I think we'd have time for one more question as we approach the top of the hour. I'll take a look at our box here. Let's see. See, our final question to wrap up the evening for our students. We have a few first years, many first years, over 400, who have recently matriculated on campus. What advice would you give them as they begin to embark on connections and entertain the possibility of declaring a pathway or applying to a center?
I think that's a really good question. Oh, sorry, Hannah. I think that's a really good question, and something the other week I was thinking about. I have a friend who's a math major, and last spring I was talking to him about that. I took my multivariable calculus class. I took my first semester, was with him, and I hadn't really caught up with him in a bit, and I asked him how math was going, and he said, sort of somberly, that he wasn't really enjoying it, but just like there's nothing else for him, and he's tried some other things, but just nothing really clicked except for math, and he's not too happy in the major. And I was reflecting back on that, and I just thought that was such a sad sort of story with all the possibility of connections. It's something where there's so many great opportunities for you to sort of go out and find a class among the hundreds of classes offered each semester and find a way to sort of make the most out of the curriculum. So I would give advice that, take as many classes in different departments and across a curriculum as you can, because I think only when you have the most, widest view will you find the thing that really speaks to you the most.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can attest to that. I took so many different types of classes my freshman year that I don't think I think my first psychology class was my fall semester of my sophomore year. So my whole first year I was taking a wide variety of classes, and it was definitely very valuable. I learned a lot of skills from taking those different classes. And I would also just say to incoming freshmen, the Connections curriculum and Con in general offers so many valuable resources. Take advantage of them. Reach out to your professors, reach out to your career advisor. Like, they're there for you, and they want to help you succeed. And because we are such a small school, it's really easy to forge those relationships.
I would say, take the classes that interest you. If a class seems like it sparks an interest, follow it, because you'll never know where that'll lead. And that's the exciting part of Connections and getting to take different courses, not just for the sake of taking different courses, but because you're following a passion. And also not to be scared to ask for help, because everyone has said, the faculty, upperclassmen are always excited to help you find your way through Con, because sometimes having so many options can be intimidating, but you're in good hands at Connecticut College.
And perhaps to wrap it up and continuing off that question, Professor Queen, Dean Singer, say you're speaking with high school students who are exploring colleges and universities. How would you encapsulate Connections at Connecticut College and encourage them to perhaps pursue this very integrative option that's very distinctive in the realm of liberal arts colleges?
Do you want to go first, Sarah, or Professor Queen?
I would just encourage them to, as many of the students here have said tonight, follow your interest, follow your passions, dream big, and the Connections program, the pathways are here to support that journey.
And what I would add is, if we had a whole other time with you, we could tell you so much more about the Academic Resource Center, about the Writing Center, and all the supports that are there, and the great sophomore advisors, the student advisors who advise the first year students and give so much support. So the way that I would sum it up, if you have a take-home message from tonight, is that Connections is about supported exploration and supported innovation. It's about having people who have your back while you're finding your way to what really matters to you and what you're really passionate about. And that, to me, is the best essence of a liberal arts education, to have that support and yet be able to explore and really find yourself at the same time. And I think we've been able to achieve that with this new curriculum. So I hope you'll learn more about it in the months ahead.
Well, thanks to our panelists. If we were together in the same room, I'm sure we'd be acknowledging them with thunderous applause at this point in Palmer Auditorium, which is being renovated right now, by the way. So if you have additional questions, I encourage you to email us at admission@concol.edu. I've also put my email address there. And I'd also like to direct you to other virtual opportunities offered by Connecticut College, including online interviews, virtual tours, videos available, as well as some other fall open house events, which will be taking place over the course of this week and also again in November. But I hope everyone is safe, healthy, and stays that way. And I want to acknowledge our panelists one last time for a splendid evening of a lot of invigorating and insightful tips and information. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, I want to say thank you to the prospective students and families who came, but also thank you to Professor Queen and to our students really for taking this time. It's really an act of love for the college to do that, and I so appreciate it. So good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.